Hi, I'm Tracy from the Cake Craftery, and I'm going to show you my take on making a cake island in an ocean of jelly. I started by setting myself up with a 12-inch strong masonite cake board, two 8-inch cake rings, and some pieces of acetate from toy packaging which I've washed well and stuck together with double-sided tape. I've used a product called Magic Nano Tape to stick the two cake rings together and also to stick them down to the board. Now, you definitely don't need this product. You'll see later that you can just use a dam of buttercream around there to stop the jelly leaking out. That tip is courtesy of Liz Merrick from the Sugar Geek Show. The cake ring is now held firmly to the board with overlapping pieces of strong plastic tape. I've started with two 6-inch cakes, a 5-inch and a 4-inch. They're sitting on a 6-inch cake card at the bottom. Before I start carving, I'm thinking about the highest point my jelly can go to by comparing with the height of the acetate. My layers are sandwiched with white chocolate ganache. I've decided to carve a mountainous rocky island with 2 or 3 peaks. I'm saving all the scraps in a container to make cake clay if I need it to build parts up later on. I'm cutting a few cracks and crevices into the rock. Here I'm smooshing the cake and the ganache together to make a clay to build up the peaks of the mountain. This is really just the same as making cake pops. I coated the upper part of the island mountain that sticks up out of the sea with dark chocolate ganache, and I'm coating the lower part with white chocolate ganache. That's not really necessary, of course. You could coat the whole thing in dark or the whole thing in light, or even a coloured ganache. I just wanted the lower part to blend in with the sand at the bottom of the ocean. It's personal choice, really. You could also use buttercream instead. I refrigerated the cake for a little while to harden the ganache, and then I was worried about the jelly soaking into the cake, so I'm going to do a thin coat of just straight melted chocolate all over it. That's what I'm doing now. I'm making sure to get right into any crevices and right down to the bottom so as not to leave anywhere that moisture can get into the cake. Now I'm blending some of the dark chocolate down over the white to make a more natural joining of the two colours, because I'm not sure exactly where my jelly line is going to come to. I've left that chocolate to set for a while I've attended to some other chores I had to do. Now I'm spraying a light coat of canola oil inside my acetate ring. Because my jelly's not a really thick gummy jelly, I just wanted to help it along that little bit more when it comes time to unmould it. I'm wiping off the excess, so there's a very light coat inside there. I'm spreading a little chocolate down on the board to hold the cake in place, remembering that the cake is actually sitting on a card itself. That'll hold the two together. Next time I do this, I think I'll have a larger cake in that size ring, or a smaller ring on a smaller cake, so I don't need quite so much jelly, and that will make the jelly a little more transparent also. It's quite a big gap there. I'm pouring the remainder of the white chocolate in all around the cake, between the ring and the cake, to make a sort of sandy base for my ocean. This should also act as a further seal to stop the card under the cake from getting wet from the jelly. I had prepared earlier all sorts of sea life and stones and rocks and bits and pieces out of chocolate and modelling chocolate, because if you used fondant or gum paste, it would just dissolve when you poured the jelly on top of it. And using a bamboo satay skewer to help me position the pieces, I end up taking the acetate ring out just to make a bit more room for my hands and placing it back later. And then I decided just to use the pieces that would be more in keeping with the scale of the rocky island, and the tiny fish and the giant sea turtle and some large sort of seaweed and small stones, rather than the big starfish and the big shells. I just thought I wanted to keep the scale right for this project, but for the next one I might have a bit more fun and place all sorts of colourful bits and pieces in there. I've coloured some of the white chocolate green and I'm just using that to hold things in place. Now there are a few loose stones on the bottom and they will move a little bit when I pour the jelly in, but I'm not too worried about that. I'm also using some of that green chocolate to paint some more seaweed and algae on the sides of the rocks. Now I'm taking some cocoa butter, just a little bit, melting it in the microwave, and I'm mixing up some chocolate colouring powders, not your usual petal dusts. They've got to be oil-based friendly, and making up a black and a grey, and I later make some white up also to paint my mountains. If you use normal food colouring gels or dusts, they'll just dissolve into the jelly and make a mess and make it very cloudy as well, just the same way fondant or gum paste figures would. I'm just rubbing the colours very randomly over the brown chocolate at the top just to accentuate the textures and leaving some of the chocolate showing through. I've bought dark blue and light blue jelly, but I've decided just to use the light blue to improve transparency also, especially given that I've got quite a thick area of jelly to prepare. This jelly is going to be reinforced with extra gelatin powder, the unflavoured sort, just to give it a bit more cutting quality and strength rather than the jelly you would just eat with a spoon out of a bowl. I'm using 3 85-gram boxes. I'm just whisking up the dried jelly powder just to break up any clumps. Now I'm blooming about 40 grams of unflavoured gelatin over a cup of cold water, and I'll leave it for about 5 minutes after a quick stir. Once thickened, microwave it briefly to liquefy it again. I'm adding 3 cups of very hot but not boiling water to my flavoured gelatin, and I'm also going to give that a good stir. And then I add the bloomed gelatin to the flavoured gelatin and combine it well. Here I'm just checking that there are no undissolved gelatin granules left in the mix. I'm adding a tiny amount of liquid green food colouring just to make it slightly greener. I'm going to cool off my jelly in some ice water so that it cools quickly but doesn't start to set. If it was warm it would melt all the chocolate and ganache on the cake and would be a bit of a disaster. And if I popped it in the fridge I'd probably forget it for too long and it would probably start to set. Now it's at room temperature and ready to go. I'm using a jug to pour the jelly into the cake. You could also just spoon it in spoonful by spoonful. You'll see some of these stones and pieces moving around slightly in the bottom there, but that doesn't worry me too much because they've been randomly positioned anyway. They'll set into place soon. Okay, so this is where you need to stop and get it in the fridge and let that first little layer of jelly firm up somewhat. If you poured it all in one go, it would probably all start pouring out through the ring. When the first layer is partially set, and it's important that it's not fully set or you'll get a line showing, you can start pouring another layer of jelly on top of that. Refrigerate briefly between each layer. You could possibly top up the whole amount of the remainder of the jelly at this stage, but I wasn't prepared to risk it, so I did it in about 3 layers, I think, 3 or 4. This technique would also allow you to go lighter and lighter as you go up to the surface of the ocean, but as I had mixed all my colour up to start with, I just stuck with the one colour. My jelly is going in the fridge overnight now to set. It will probably need a minimum of 4 hours if you're doing it during the day. Bear in mind that if you want the jelly to set faster, you'll just have a stronger gelatin mix and it will be a different consistency in the end. It'll be more a gummy candy type of consistency rather than a jello. I've removed the tape from the base of the ring, which was a bit of a mission because it was super sticky, which is a good thing in this case. And I'm running a knife between the sheets of acetate with the double-sided tapers, just so I've got separate sheets to make it easy to remove them. The acetate sheets came away really easily. I'm using some homemade graham cracker crumbs to make the sandy beaches. I had these left over from a key lime pie that I made earlier in the week, so that was very handy. And I'm using white cocoa butter to paint the sea foam. Because I haven't got any figures or fish or whales or anything like that coming out of the water, I decided it needed a few more rocks to make a really rocky island, so I've just used some modelling chocolate coloured with the black and grey cocoa butter that I made up earlier. I also made a very simple little sailboat with some more modelling chocolate and a couple of wafer paper sails, and used an edible marker pen just to add a few markings onto that. When I was adding the sand to the top, I dropped my teaspoon quite hard on the surface, and you might be able to see there a small superficial crack appeared there. I was worried it was going to open up further, but it was all good, and I put a little bit of a rock over it to disguise most of it there. Can you see the giant turtle peering out from amongst the greenery? I've decorated the board with the remainder of the graham cracker crumbs and some of the bits and pieces I'd made earlier that I didn't use inside the cake. I'm hoping that change of scale gives a feeling of lying on a beach and looking further out to sea at the rocky island. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please like and subscribe for more to come.